Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich. We are live. The holidays are over. Here we are on a snowy morning, January the 8th in East Tennessee. And today I'm joined by Taylor Wright. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Taylor to introduce himself to you guys. But before I do anything, let me get set up. If you're just joining us this morning, my name is Rich Brown. I'm the co-host and co-founder of the American Warrior Society and the American Warrior Show, which is America's #1 self-defense podcast. And if you're joining us today on a podcast, welcome. And if you're joining us today on Coffee with Rich Live on Facebook, then welcome to you as well. If you're just popping in this morning, please like and share, and I will get set up. I got the notification that I'm live. That's pretty cool. I'll do that. Okay. Gerald is on out there in Oregon, coin number 952. And if you're wondering what a coin number is, please check out AmericanWarriorSociety.com, where you can get all of your self-defense needs met and learn more about becoming a coin member. Adam Montgomery is on. This has been a while since I caught one of these. Well, good morning, Adam. And Adam is coin number 878 down in Georgia. Gilly is on from the Philippines. Terry, lots of folks joining us. Please like and share. Got a great show for you this morning. I am joined by Taylor Wright. But before Taylor tells us all about himself, let me tell you about our sponsor today. Our sponsor is Appalachian Standard. Appalachian Standard makes the finest craft hemp products that I'm aware of. And Jesse Ross and his beautiful family growing hemp in greenhouses all year round in Asheville, North Carolina, make the finest hemp products you can buy. As a matter of fact, my wife was on her brand new spin cycle the other day, Taylor, and she went a little crazy, I think, and injured her back. So we rubbed it down with some of their CBD mentholated salve, and she is feeling better. So if you want to check out their products, apphemp.com. Use AWS15 for 15% off of all your orders. Wow, we got 21 folks on this morning. PJ Tahoe out there in beautiful Tahoe is on. Brett is on. This is Morning Gentleman, coin number 876. Ronald is on. John is on out there in Oklahoma. Terry is on from Arab, Alabama. Good morning, folks. Taylor, good morning and welcome to Coffee with Rich.
Good morning, sir. Thanks again for having me. It's an honor to be on the show. I'm a longtime listener to the American Warrior Society. I'm actually coin number 1315. So not as low a number some of those other guys have been a lot longer members, but still an honor to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a Marine veteran, served for 5 years from 2007 to 2012. After that, I got out and I actually spent about a year doing some security contracting and some intermittent work. And then after that, I went and used my GI Bill, went to school for mechanical engineering. After I graduated, I went and worked for a police department, a local police department over here, because, you know, who doesn't get their engineering degree and then go work for a police department? And then actually about a year into that, I decided that maybe I should go ahead and use the engineering degree just to at least use it. So I did so, was a wind tunnel test engineer. I hated it. It was boring. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And so I actually went back to the department, and that's where I'm at right now. So again, it's great to be here, and thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, Taylor, we're excited to have you. We got a lot of interesting topics that we're going to talk about. You and I have been exchanging emails for some time now, and I'm really interested to hear some of the things you got. Welcome to the 35 folks that are joining us live this morning, this beautiful Friday morning here on a snowy Cumberland Plateau. I want to say good morning to Mr. Mike Seeklander is on this morning. He's encouraging all you folks out there in Coffee with Rich Land to hit the share button, and we'd really appreciate you doing that. Share this content with somebody that needs it. Sam is on this morning from Wisconsin. My good friend Will Parker out there in Montana is on, coin number 800. Dan is on from Flowery Branch, Georgia. Terry says, nice to meet you, Taylor. Semper Fi. Thank you, Terry. Anyway, folks, let's go ahead and jump into the show. So we heard a little bit about your background. I guess some of the topics that we decided to talk about is tell us about the company that you run as well as being a full-time police officer.
Yes, sir. So the company I started is called Defenders and Disciples, or DADS for short. I started off as a website, just kind of like a landing page for some of the ideas and stuff that I wanted to put out there. Something I wanted to do for a while, and actually was going to start it right when I got out, but I just wasn't at a good place to start it as far as understanding how business starts or how business runs and everything like that. And so I recently started it, and so the main idea was just having a blog to put some ideas out there and also train people in firearm safety and firearms manipulation and stuff like that. And so, I mean, that's pretty much it there. And I love it. It's my passion to teach people how to shoot and take people that either are completely uncomfortable with firearms and making them comfortable with them, just to seeing that how much that empowers them, or people that are kind of struggling with some of the fundamentals and building them into someone who's a really good shooter.
And as far as your shooting background, you were in security forces, I believe, in the Marine Corps. You were on a CQB team. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the training we had there, I don't know how many rounds we shot during those 2 months of training, but it was quite a bit. And we had to do a lot of drills that involved clearing rooms and stuff like that. And the standard was no flyers or no misses. So it was absolutely anytime we did any training or anything like that in the room clearing procedures, we couldn't have any flyers. So we had a lot of people drop due to that. That just were missing the shots. And that's kind of where I've been passionate about shooting long before that. Like, I think the first time I went to the range when I was like probably 7 or 8 years old, and I really knew it was something I liked to do. And it just always came natural to me. But yeah, that course kind of set me off in the military as far as wanting to shoot more and more. And then I really liked the idea of teaching other people how to shoot, because I would have buddies that I was on the team with that would give them coaching tips and stuff and help them get better. And so I was just really attracted to coaching and training other people how to shoot.
Well, speaking of that, we talked a little bit before the show this morning and perhaps a little bit yesterday about what it takes to be an instructor. And there's the military instructor, there's the law enforcement instructor, there's the civilian instructor, and they come in varieties. Tell us a little bit about some of your thoughts about being an instructor.
Yes, sir. So this is something I've been thinking about recently, as far as the difference between the public sector and private sector instructors. Public sector being military and law enforcement, and private obviously being civilian instructors, who can also get, I guess, contracted to teach military and law enforcement. For the longest time, I always kind of saw public sector instructors as kind of like the holy grail of instructing. I mean, you're the military or law enforcement instructor teaching other military and law enforcement. And there's a ton of great military and law enforcement instructors out there. But I think one of the problems with that sector is that typically those instructors are brought into that position by their leadership, or because they know someone, and they're typically not really held accountable to their students, with the exception of maybe student evaluations and stuff. And even then, it really depends on whether or not someone's willing to read those evaluations seriously and make themselves better as an instructor. However, on the civilian side, you're graded by the invisible hand of the economy. So you have to do good, or no one's going to come to your course, because no one's being paid to come to your course and they're not being told to come to your course. So I think that civilian instructors in that regard are held to a higher standard. And I think the public sector could learn a lot from how the civilian instructors teach their courses. So, it's just something I've been noticing or thinking about recently, because I've had, like I said, I had some great public sector instructors in the military and law enforcement. And then I've also had those instructors that are somewhat dogmatic in their philosophies, and they're just kind of regurgitating what they were told, even though it either hasn't been vetted or it just doesn't make sense at all.
Why is dogmatic necessarily wrong?
I think we have to know why we're doing what we're doing, regardless of what it is. I think that there's, especially when it comes to something as serious as teaching someone how to use a firearm to potentially save their life or save the life of someone else. I think we have to know what we're teaching them and why we're teaching them that, and has what we're teaching them been vetted in some way or another. And I think we might have lost Rich there. So I'm going to keep talking a little bit. So some of the dogma out there, one in particular is the idea that you're not going to be able to hit the slide release or slide lock on your handgun during a reload. I think if that's the case, then officers can forget being able to defeat a level 3 retention holster to align their sights, to press the trigger correctly, or to even be able to hit the magazine release in the first place, or then insert a new fresh magazine. I don't think those things are true. I think if you train to that standard, you'll be able to do that in that stressful situation. But telling people that they're not going to be able to do something while at the same time suggesting that they'll be able to do other things that may be more dependent on those fine motor skills. Again, I think that's an issue. Rich, I think we lost you for a second there.
That's what happened.
I just kept talking. One of the things I mentioned was the idea that you're not going to be able to hit the slide lock or slide release during a reload in a stressful situation. And I said, if that's the case, then we can forget officers being able to defeat a level 3 retention holster, press the triggers correctly, align their sights, or even hit the magazine release, or then insert a rectangular shape into a rectangular hole.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the idea that I'll tell on myself. I've told this story a couple of times on Coffee with the Rich, I'm sure, at least once. And I was invited to come to the National Training Center at Xerox up in Virginia, outside of DC, near the Beltway, to teach Marine Corps mission planning. I'd been an officer for a few years, and I went up there and I had rehearsed and practiced, and everything was perfect. But I was using one of those big $5 words that I really didn't know the meaning to. And somebody's like, "Hey, what does that mean?" I mean, they didn't understand it either, and I was caught flat-footed. So although everything else about the presentation was great, it was professionally embarrassing to not know that. So I would just say that, like you said, understand the why. Why are you using that $5 word?
Mm-hmm.
$2 word will do just as fine. So I think you raised some great points. Let's talk about you're a Christian, and one of the things about your website, Disciplines and Disciples, I believe. Am I saying that right?
Defenders and Disciples.
Defenders and Disciples. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Is that there's a moral component to it. So thinking about that, let's talk about, because I get this question all the time, and those of us that are Christians get this question all the time. You carry a gun, but you're a Christian. How
Mm-hmm.
does that work? I mean, how does self-defense play into Christian morality?
Yes, sir. So I think first and foremost, it boils down to intent. It's why you're carrying a gun. If you're carrying a gun because you want to get in a gunfight, then you're probably carrying a gun for the wrong reason. You'll probably find one. However, if you're carrying a gun because you love people and you want to protect people and preserve life, while at the same time, this is the paradox that you might end up taking life. I think that is a good reason, a righteous reason. There's a few scriptures. I've looked up a few here. One is Luke 11:21. When a strong man fully armed guards his own place, his goods are safe. I mean, I don't like taking scriptures completely out of context without what happens before or after, but some of these are pretty clear and cut. I mean, I can't imagine the context would change that, or the context doesn't change that very much when you look at the other scriptures or the before and after. And then Luke 22:36 is, I had to write it down. He said to them, "But now let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one." I mean, we all know what swords are used for. They're not used for just like, I mean, it's not just a little tool you would use, pry something open. I mean, it's a sword. It's used for defense. And then another one here, Psalms 144:1 of David, "Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle." Even my fingers to hit that slide release when I need to do a speed. So yeah, I mean, there's countless scriptures that I believe support the idea of using force to protect someone. And when I went to school, it was a Christian university, and there were some professors there that were actually pacifists, and they believed in absolutely no. They believe Christians should not serve in government. They believe Christians should not be in the military, law enforcement, and I just never understood. I understand that a Christian should not be someone who wants to go seek out violence for the sake of being violent, but someone who's willing to stand in the gap, I believe, is pretty honorable profession. And I never really had the opportunity to talk one-on-one with those professors, but I'd like to ask them, like, what would you do if you're in that situation where, whatever hypothetical situation, you're in a dark alley and you see someone getting raped or mugged? It's like, are you just going to stand there, or are you going to call the police? Well, if you just stand there, then you're just as responsible as the person doing it. And if you call the police, well, then you may not be using force, but you're basically putting that off on someone else. So you're willing to let someone else use force so that you can keep your yourself untainted by violence or whatever. So it's kind of a strange idea, I believe, to suggest that we're never called to use violence. Yeah, I don't agree with that, but that's my views on how my faith coincides with my belief in self-defense and defending others.
Yeah, that's you bring up some interesting topics, and if you have questions for Taylor, just throw them in there. It looks like some of you are already doing that. Throw them in the comments section. Your professors that had the idea of you shouldn't be in government, you shouldn't run for office, you shouldn't be in the military. I mean, you're surrendering that position to someone that isn't a Christian, that's values, beliefs don't align with yours. I don't understand that. To me, that's intellectually, it just breaks apart under the weight of its own ignorance. But
well, yeah, you're also denying yourself as a vessel through which God can have influence on others, and like being in those positions of power, the politics portion, you could be in that position of power in politics and be an influence for Judeo-Christian values. But it's the same thing with not voting. If someone who doesn't vote is just refusing to if they're a Christian and then they're going to vote for Christian values, they're denying God's power to be able to flow through them, or being a vessel for God to be able to influence the world or influence their country.
Yeah. Thank you to the 38 folks that are joining us this morning live on Coffee with Rich, and to all those that will listen in the podcast in the weeks to follow. Gerald has an interesting point here. He says, isn't there approved curriculum that has to be followed under the public sector while civilians can change on the fly? And I would say, yeah, as a public sector instructor, as a Marine Corps instructor, as a law enforcement instructor, I had to follow the dictates of whatever the company or the command's policy was, or the department's policy. And it wasn't what Rich Brown thought was the best thing to teach. It was what I was ordered and directed to teach. What say you?
Yeah, I think it could be a good and bad thing. Good thing being that there are standards, and you're not just going to some, Joe Schmo's tactical training and you don't know what you're getting. It's not been vetted. The bad thing being that the government in general is slow to change, and it can take a long time for policies to update and people to realize that what they're doing is either outdated or just doesn't even work or never has worked. So I think it's important to have a balance between standards and standards that are flexible to change when discoveries are made in training or the world. So yeah, I mean, I think it's, like I said, a good thing and bad thing.
Yeah. And PJ is on this morning. PJ is a retired federal law enforcement officer, and PJ says you can absolutely tell when an instructor is merely assigned to the position, perhaps with their training and experience, versus an instructor who's passionate about education and is themselves a lifelong learner. You learn so much more from the latter. I absolutely agree to that.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Let's see here. Manhar over there in South Africa. Good morning, sir. He says, good afternoon, guys. Lots of action on your side this week. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk to some of that this morning. Ryan and Tracy Meyer says, King David was a soldier, a warrior, and a man after God's own heart. Very, very true. Speaking of what's going on this side of the world, let's talk about the centralization of power in our country and how everybody is always looking toward the next presidential election and who holds the executive branch of government. But you and I were talking before the show this morning, Taylor, and that's perhaps not the way we should be looking at it. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think that was the intent by the founding fathers for this country. I think the intent was to have states have their own rights and do things how they want to do, while the federal government obviously had a responsibility of national defense and making sure everything we were cohesive as a nation. I think we put way too much emphasis on the presidential election, and I mean it's every 4 years it's this American Idol is popularity contest it's becoming more and more of a popularity contest that happens, and we put so much emphasis on one man, and not only that, but then we expect him to have all the right decisions for the next 4 years and be able to make all the right calls and please everyone when we're seemingly divided 50-50. So yeah, I think a better solution would be to put less emphasis, marginalize the presidential election, and then emphasize the local elections. I think a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this myself, don't put as much emphasis on paying attention to local politics and who's going to be running the state and cities and counties as opposed to who's going to be running the country.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it because it should be a small, limited federal government, right? And the more power that our federal government has taken over the past decades and centuries, the more people look toward it for all the answers and what's going on. And I agree with you. I don't think that's the way the founders wanted it. But that's kind of where we're at.
And then we've given federal agencies, I think there's like 3,000 plus federal agencies, 3-letter agencies now, giving them way too much power to arbitrate and just make laws through their organizations, through bureaucracy, as opposed to the actual process of, Congress doing their job and making laws. One example would be the ATF.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about that. What do you think the Second Amendment really saying, Taylor?
So this is one thing that I have a buddy who's a federal agent. We've discussed this a lot, and we're on the phone one day, and he asked me, he's like, "What do you think the Second Amendment provides for? Like, what is the most thing you think someone should be able to privately own?" And as an engineer, like a lot of times when you go to solve problems, you would take something to one extreme and then to the other, and then figure out like kind of what your bounds are and help that guide your decision. And so when I was thinking about this problem, I kind of did that. And I thought, okay, well, what is the most extreme weapon someone could have? And I even went hypothetical, something like I can't remember the name of it, but it's like in the Avenger movie. Basically, the hand thing that like kills everyone at once. Like you push a button and everyone's dead. Like that would be the ultimate weapon. If you could push a button and everyone would be dead, that's it. And then the other extreme would be no arms whatsoever for anyone. So I knew it had to be somewhere in between, and it was just where that line is, because the question always gets brought up is, oh, you think someone should be able to own a nuclear weapon? And I personally don't think an individual should be able to own a nuclear weapon. And the reason for this is, I'll explain. But so the first and foremost intent of the Second Amendment, or to be armed in general, I believe, is suppression of tyranny. Suppression of tyranny is the main purpose for the Second Amendment. The founding fathers just got out of a revolution from a totalitarian government, and they knew that you had to be armed in order to protect yourself from that type of regime. Secondly, being self-defense, hunting being third, and then just like general collection or a hobby, maybe like competitive shooting or something like that, I would say for fourth. That's how I would rank them. Some people would rank them differently, and in my classes, I actually ask people this question, like what they think is more important along that on that continuum. So starting with suppression of tyranny, since that's the most important. Obviously, if people had nuclear weapons, well, that would be a pretty effective way to suppress tyranny. However, if your neighbor had a nuclear weapon, there's so many things that go along with that, so many variables as far as storage, and you don't, if they just have a bad day. I mean, being a police officer, seeing a lot of people and their worst days, and they shouldn't have a nuclear weapon in those periods, especially like on domestics. But like it would just be really bad. So I began to develop like, okay, what's the limit? And pretty much the limit I came to is what I like to call a combat vote or a martial vote. And the actual to draw a line is like what you should have. I draw the line at like what an individual soldier is issued in the military, or a law enforcement officer is issued, whatever they are individually issued, not unit issued, not team issued, what they're individually issued, be it rifles, handguns, and to include fully automatic. And the reason I say that is because just as with an election, we vote and our vote represents a certain amount. Like I don't vote and my vote represents 10 people. I vote and my vote represents one person. So I believe just as in a civil situation, when we vote, that vote represents a proportional amount. I think in a combative situation, when all other processes fail, I mean, that's what combat is when agreement has failed and it's like, okay, we can't agree on something, so we have to go to a different solution, and that is fighting. So I think in that situation, you have what's called a martial or a combat vote, and that would be your vote has to be proportional to you as a person. And that's on the individual level. And then I think on the community and state level, obviously there should be more armament allowed, because it would take more of a consensus to use those arms. Just like in the military, I mean, you don't just give one person access to a weapon of mass destruction, like a missile. I mean, I guess you give pilots, but even pilots are vetted by someone, and they have to get certain authorization to fire those weapons, either close air support or whatever the case might be. It's multiple people agreeing that yes, this armament needs to be used at this time. But then on the soldier individual level, they can use that weapon because they've been trained to do it. And I'll get back to that in a second, the training aspect. But they've been trained to do it, so they know when to make that call, and they don't have to ask permission. Like, hey, can I take this shot? With the exception of some circumstances. But yeah, that's just kind of how I went about approaching that question. And I'm sure there's a lot of flaws with that answer. I don't have all the answers, but yeah, that's just kind of where I was at. And the other issue with that is training. There's a huge lack of training, and that's another reason I started that company, was because I saw the huge lack of training. People just think that, oh, because I have a gun, I'm okay, and that's not the case. You know, you have to. While it may be the case that you could be that person that just goes out and buys a gun and gets lucky in a situation that doesn't require a lot of skill, and you may be able to defend yourself or someone else. I think that training is just absolutely crucial when it comes to owning firearms. In this country, we have a tendency to talk about our rights and neglect the responsibilities associated with those rights. And I think every single right comes with a responsibility. Even the freedom of speech, it comes with a responsibility to use it appropriately. And the Second Amendment is no different. And it's, I think that's where the emphasis needs to be made a lot of times in the Second Amendment community, is on training, not so much as what we can have. While that's important as well, so there's not government encroachment and infringement on those rights, I think training needs to be brought to the forefront even more.
No, that is. And every time Mike and I have talked about training or even broached the subject of mandatory training requirements for any sort of ownership or carry of firearms, I get an avalanche of emails, hate emails. So and I understand what people are saying. Like, look, you can look at other examples of countries around the world where the training requirements and all this other stuff that comes with it. Once the laws start getting written, it's a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, don't make the law mandate it. Do it yourself. Seek it out. But so many people will run out and buy that. And I'm probably preaching to the choir to a lot of our folks listening and watching this morning. They'll go out and run out and buy that next firearm instead of buying ammo, instead of attending a training class from someone like Will Parker, who's on this morning, who's a phenomenal firearms instructor. But Will says senators being elected at the local level versus being appointed by the state legislature disenfranchise the state legislature. Yeah, that is very true. And there was a bill to amend that where the state legislatures pick the 2 senators that will go to DC instead of a vote for who those senators are. And I support that wholeheartedly. There'll be more accountability to the state instead of their wealthy donors. Pardon me. Jera says we haven't been taken over because the populace of America carries or owns guns. Take our God-given rights away and we will no longer be free. Let's see. Gerald says a 5-foot woman should be able to protect herself and her children. Police are minutes away. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you need them right now, they're not there. You can't carry a cop around in your pocket.
Yeah, usually they're just to take the report after the fact.
And unfortunately, yeah, that's true. Johnny King says the type of weapon you need evolves with the type of crimes being committed, both by the government and by criminals. Fabio says, in the average 10-minute response of law enforcement, anything can happen. It's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That is some people's thoughts, of course. And I would say you need to know the law of self-defense. Please check out Andrew Branca, The Law of Self-Defense. Buy his book for $25 or whatever he's charging. I'm not making any money on telling you to do that, but I will tell you, it can go a little bit of education in the law will go a long way. And I think, Taylor, that a lot of the cities we saw burning to the ground in 2020 over these shootings by law enforcement officers, really it stems from a gross misunderstanding of what the laws of in the use of force is. Would you agree or disagree?
I completely agree.
Yeah. If they knew the law, I'd be like, okay, well, that was a good shoot. It's tragic. Somebody lost their life.
Yeah.
However, the circumstances of the shooting was such that they were put in motion by the perpetrator, and he alone bears a responsibility for what the outcome was. And somehow everybody wants to put the blame on the men and women that had to show up and take action there. No,
I completely agree. I think we have a tendency in this country to forget the actions of the suspect or the actions of the offender and how those force the hand of the person who defend themselves, or the police officer who was forced to use deadly force or some other form of force.
Yeah, Jeff Chastain says, have the law encourage training. Don't make it so difficult to start a training facility. Yeah. Tiny says, I don't believe our votes make any difference any longer. So what's next? And see that you got such a great point there. And 73 million people voted one way in the election, and so many voted the other way. And of that 73 million that voted for President Trump, there is a sizable amount of folks that really, really in their heart of hearts believe that the election is stolen. So what do you do with that? I mean, how do you bring the country back together when such a large percentage of the country are like, no, my vote was stolen. My vote doesn't count. Our electoral process is irrevocably broken. What do you do?
Man, I don't know.
I don't know. That's the $50 million question, right?
I think it boils down to, or goes back to what we talked about earlier with putting less emphasis on the presidential election. I don't know how we do that exactly, because I think people are going to continue to do that. But yeah, just giving states more autonomy and reeling in the federal government. And that's the thing. That's a bipartisan solution. That's not a right versus left solution. Like giving states the power to do what they want to do within reason, obviously, which then we can argue about what's within reason. I I think that's a byproduct. Like Californians are doing. I'm not gonna generalize, but California do what California wants to do. Texas do what Texas wants to do, and I think everyone would be much happier than every 4 years, 50% of us are extremely happy and elated, and then 50% of us are depressed. And I think that would be the solution. And I don't know how we get there, but I think it's better than what we have right now, or better than the mentality we have right now.
Well, somebody said, and I don't know who it was, but the democracy is the tyranny of the majority, and that has always been the problem with a pure democracy, and why we really need to get back to the founding of the country, I believe, is a constitutional republic, and not just a pure democracy, like you said, where every 4 years, 51% gets to stomp all over the rights of the other 49%. I don't think that's a winning solution. Matter of fact, that's a solution for disillusionment. Let's take a look at some of the comments.
Voting process, I think, like, we're in 2021. I almost said 2020. We're in 2021, and we use some of the most archaic forms of voting. And we have all this technology at our fingertips and encryption, and I don't see how we don't have some better way of casting our ballots and securing the democracy. I mean, I get you're always going to have some level of cheating, but and I don't know what evidence is. I haven't looked through everything in this last one, so I'm not going to make any statements with not all the facts. But we just have to have better security and better confidence. And I think having that confidence will make people who may have otherwise not voted, because they're like, well, what the heck, it doesn't matter. They might end up voting. And I think we'd have a better representation of what the country wants.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever told this. My grandfather used to tell about how back in the 30s, he voted multiple times in one day because they were given shots of whiskey to vote a certain way. And he's like, oh, I can get another one if I go back in and vote. Sure. I don't have an ID. Let's go vote again. Get another shot of whiskey. So we've learned the letter. Julie up there in New York says Cuomo blocked insurance for firearms owners in New York. So if you try to get insurance to protect yourself from a possible use of force scenario, you can't. And that's one of those things, here again, we're saying we need more power at the local level, but look what happens at the local level when we give these folks a lot of power. It's an infringement on the rights. Tiny says, let's see here. I personally know 2 people in Georgia that received 3 unsolicited mail-in ballots each. Jara says, overwhelming proof of voter fraud. Our courts won't act. And this is what I'm talking about, Jerry. There's a lot of people that have that same perception of what's going on. And maybe like you, Taylor, I haven't looked into it enough. I know that the courts looked into it. They felt that it was baseless and chose not to take action. So, what is a reasonable, responsible person to do? I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Taylor?
I don't. Yeah.
Robert says the federal government doesn't want to give up power. They are trying to acquire more. And I would agree with that. I think that if we expect the federal government to give up some of the power to the states, it's absolutely a pipe dream. It's absolutely not going to happen. And maybe I'm being overly pessimistic, but I just don't see that.
Yeah. I think on that, going back to the gun discussion and responsibilities versus rights, it's also kind of a paradox to have the government be the arbiter of what guns you can have when those guns are also intended to suppress that government from going tyrannical. So that was another thing I was going to talk about, is how it's kind of a weird situation there. I mean, I think you have to have some level of agreement, and that would be basically a law. A law is some form of agreement on what you can or can't have. But it also is paradoxical that the entity that's doing that is also the entity you're supposed to be suppressing from becoming tyrannical. But sometimes I'll use this. I drew it out real quick because I don't have the graphic. But in my classes, when I talk about rights versus responsibility, I don't know if I saw this somewhere. I wrote it down once, but it's basically this chart, and it's virtue versus tyranny. And so, like, as you become more virtuous, the tyranny. I have that right. Let me make sure I have that right. Yeah, as you become more virtuous, the tyranny, the need for tyranny decreases. But then, as virtue in a society drops off, then the government has to step in and start making rules for them. I think that's part of what we're seeing too. Is just virtue in our country is plummeting to some degree, and I think when that happens, the government either by design or just naturally steps into that role of becoming the babysitter.
Yeah, I talked about this last year. I think we had Neil Taylor on, a South African attorney, and probably need to bring him back on. But he's also a barrister in the United Kingdom as well. I think he spent 11 years over there working in the United Kingdom. And I've visit the UK almost every year. And one of the things that I'm always shocked by is their rules regarding self-defense and firearms ownership. I would say it doesn't exist, but it does in some forms, but it's so tightly controlled. I'll give you an example. I was there last year, 2020, and we were in Northern Ireland, and we were walking to a coffee shop. And as we were walking by, there was a gun store there. So me and my son, we popped into the gun store, and I told him, "Hey, I'm Rich, American Warrior Show, American Warrior Society." Gave them all some stickers, and they took me back into the gun vault, which they had to keep everything like a bank vault. And they were just, we were talking, and they were telling me, he goes, like, if I get in a fight in a pub, they're going to come to my house and literally seize everything I've got. He said one of the farmers there was shooting rats in his barn with a pellet rifle. Somebody called the police because they saw him walking across his field with his pellet rifle. A helicopter landed, and they seized everything until they can figure out what gun he may or may not have been carrying at the time. And I could give you 100 stories like that in the United Kingdom. And if we're not careful, that's where it goes. I just can't be any more clear than that. And the thought of even using a firearm for self-defense is anathema over there. You just can't do it and get away with it. Even if they're breaking into your home, you better choose a screwdriver. And it has to, and that's another thing, this idea of, you and I probably, Taylor, we look at a firearm or any sort of weapon as morally ambiguous, right? It depends on the person that's holding it and the way in which that they're using it. Over there, however, the weapon is an offensive weapon. There is no way that the weapon can be used defensively if carried. The carrying of the weapon is for only offensive purpose, and that's the way that the law is written, as shocking as that may sound. A holstered firearm is and only can be an offensive weapon. So it does not make sense. And I've asked the barrister from the United Kingdom to explain that and help me reason through that. And he failed to do so as well, because it's illogical.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Let's talk about, so how did you get into law enforcement? What made you do that?
So ever since leaving the military, I missed, I think as many people do, I missed that community, that I guess martial type community. So when I went to school to get my engineering degree, when I was about to graduate, I kind of realized that I missed that. And law enforcement was something I kind of always thought about. And actually before I went to school, I applied for another law enforcement agency, local one, and got accepted. Was going to go to their academy, and I got the acceptance for that and my university acceptance at the same time. And realized that if I didn't go to school now, I probably wouldn't have ever gone. So I ended up going to school. So I kind of always had that desire to serve in that capacity or serve again. And yeah, I think it's just when I worked as an engineer, I had great relationships with the people I worked with, but they just weren't my types of people. It wasn't military law. There's just a certain breed, and they weren't it. While I had great relationships with them, it's just like I felt like kind of an oddball there, and didn't feel the same way I did when I was in the military, or even now again when I'm in law enforcement. So yeah, it's just it fits more for me.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to jump off our train of conversation real quick to talk to something that Gerald just put down here. And Gerald lives out in Portland. I'm sorry, in Oregon. He says, they will single you out and come and take your farms, label you as a fanatic. That is what could be on the horizon. Now, one of the things is, why do you need a firearm? We've kind of talked to some of that this morning a little bit. It's a guard against tyranny probably is the most number one reason. I like your idea, Taylor, too, of what is the loadout for an average 0311 infantryman or a patrolman managing any city streets. That makes sense to me. I can logically wrap my head around that, because if you look at, like, for example, my ancestors, the Scots-Irish, this idea that we're here in America, we're a nation of immigrants, is a bit misleading, because there are tens of millions of us that came here. We were moving from the colony of Northern Ireland to the colony here in the Americas, as just moving from one British colony to another. It was you still were moving from British soil to British soil, and then we fought a revolution to have our own country. And one of the reasons that the Scots-Irish fought so hard under Washington, my ancestors, because they had lived under the tyranny of taxation, and okay, you tax flax, and when we were weaving flax and making fabric, and you tax the heck out of that to the point where we were starving. All right, so we go to wool, and we're shearing our sheep, and we've got the sheep, and we're doing everything right, and you tax that to the point where our children are starving, and then you label Protestants as they can't hold office, they can't go to school, our marriages are annulled because we're not Catholic. I mean, you see these things that a tyrannical government can and have done historically, and you go, enough is enough. It's time. I don't know any other thing that the government's going to listen to other than taking up arms. Now, that's a historical precedent. Will we see that again? I pray not, because it's going to be destructive for generations to come. However, I will say, when we talk about generations to come, this idea of by the people, for the people, etc., the way that Lincoln, I believe, laid it out at the Gettysburg Address, is an interesting way of looking at it. We have to remember the people that came before, what their sacrifices were, the historical context. We have to think of the people that are here now, and then we have to consider the people that will come in the future, because if we don't, then we go, why not? We're giving each other $2,000 checks during this COVID stimulus. Heck, man, why not give each other $50,000 checks? Why not 100? I mean, where does it end? Because we're just pushing it off on another generation of Americans that's going to have to pay that bill. And I think that's wrong. We need to think of the past. We don't need to tear our monuments down. We need to be respectful of the past that got us to where we are. Think about the people that are here now, but then be thoughtful with where we legislate ourselves in the future, because that bill is going to come due. What do you think, Taylor?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, this uncontrolled spending, and spending on programs that have nothing to do with the intended bill, or that have no, what I can tell, value for the American people, the people who paid into that fund, the tax fund, to be able to spend money on these programs. Yeah, that has to stop. And the solution to that, I mean, the only one I know of is just to vote the right people in office on the local elections. But yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and probably, and I know we're getting off topic, but there's so much craziness, man. I was watching them storming the Capitol the other day, and my son and I were just standing there dumbstruck watching it happen. And my son is like, is this as big deal as I think it is? I'm like, yeah, it's almost unprecedented. You have to really look back to the War of 1812, right? And the British burning the White House for something as akin to what we're seeing here. And my son made the point. He's 23 years old. He's like, Dad, this is just what I've grown up in. To me, this is just, well, of course, this is a natural outgrowth of what has been brewing So to him, it wasn't as shocking probably as some of us that have been around the sun
Hmm.
51 times, you know. But it's and I looked, Taylor. I don't know if you looked into this. I believe her name is Ashley Babbitt, the young woman that was killed at the Capitol building. But I had to really consider like what passions made this woman, a 14-year Air Force veteran, deployed multiple times to the Middle East, carried her nation's flag forward, would make her attack the Capitol building. And I thought about it, and I thought about, as an enlisted person, the oath that she probably took multiple times because she spent 14 years in the Air Force, as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So she would have had to re-enlist multiple times and reaffirm the oath that she took. And those oaths, of course, don't have expiration dates that I'm aware of. And the oath of an enlisted person that you took and I took, says, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I will bear truth, faith, and allegiance to the same, and I will obey the orders of the president and the officers appointed over me. So when you have a president saying, let's go to the Capitol building, I'm going to be there with you, and you probably have a person that is inflamed with those passions and that recalls her oath and the sanctity of that oath that she took, I can kind of understand intellectually how that person would do what she did, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's easy to empathize with that when you put yourself in her shoes. And again, I don't know. I haven't had the time to look at some of the details, or I may have had the time, but I just haven't looked at all the details surrounding that incident. But yeah, it's really sad. I hate that happened. And another thing I wanted to add on to what you're talking about, and this goes back to these ideas of suppression of tyranny and just what's going on right now in our country. And what happened the other day is, I think people need to also keep in mind that the American Revolution was unique. And I think more often than not, any revolution would probably trend towards a French type revolution than an American revolution. I think the odds are more so that it would go wrongly in terms of, like, because when you in any situation, and I'm not saying they were trying to start a revolution or whatever. I don't know what their intent was, but people need to be careful with like what they're doing and what could happen. It's like, because I'm not sure like what their objective was or intent was in that moment.
I don't either.
I don't know like if they really. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm not going to get into that. But yeah, I think there's also this idea in, I don't know, I might be completely off base here, but I think there's this notion in some groups to somewhat, I don't know if this is the right phrase, right wordage or not, but to almost fantasize about some idea of a revolution or some idea of a civil war. And I think it kind of stems from the people who, because again, my blog talks about preparedness and stuff, and little p prepping, not big P prepping. But like, I think some of those circles fantasize about the idea of a complete collapse and just anarchy and whatever. And I don't think they really fully grasp the gravity of like what that would actually be like and how horrible that would be. The zombie, and I think that may have started with the zombie apocalypse type, Walking Dead movies, maybe. Again, I may just be, this is my crackpot analysis, but I think people fantasize about that happening, or this term that's, thrown around that, a civil war type scenario breaking out. And I think we have to be very careful about that and those sentiments. And like I said, I think more often than not, I think if something like that happens, or I think typically when it has happened in history, it's not been good, because you have to trust the idea that all the people you're fighting with or whatever, or revolting with, or also have noble intents in mind and aren't just out for blood.
Yeah, I don't know what the plan was. I don't think there was a plan. Maybe I'm wrong. I guess my point is more to, I look at this young woman, and I saw the video yesterday, Taylor, so that's why it's fresh on my mind. And in some ways, it's absolutely nightmare fuel to see what was going on in that hallway in the moment that she was killed. And I see this beautiful young woman bleeding to death in our nation's capital, and I think of what passions drove her to that point of scaling the walls and breaching the hallowed halls of our government, and then losing her life so tragically. And I just came back to, if you really believe that oath enough, and you have the president of the United States telling you, I'm going to lead you, we're going to ask these people to explain their actions, etc., then of course it's a no-brainer where you end up. But I will also say that as a commissioned officer, we take a different oath, and the oath of a commissioned officer is different from an enlisted person in that you do not swear allegiance to uphold the orders of the president of the United States or the officers appointed over you. That is not in the oath of office for a commissioned officer in the military. It is, I will support and defend the Constitution, period. That way it keeps officers from following illegal or orders, which is another interesting safeguard that our founders put in place. We wanted to give officers the ability to not be duty bound to follow a tyrannical president. So everybody needs to really calm down, take stock of where we're at. If you don't like the people in office, vote them out, man. Term limits is one of those things that, oh, you're an incumbent, bye-bye. I don't care if I like you, voted for you before. We have to get these people out. I don't think our founders wanted to have political dynasties.
I completely agree. I think term limits was one of the big shortcomings of the laws we have in place. I made a joke with someone the other day. I feel like, they was late into the night while they were ratifying the Constitution, and like they're like, all right, guys, like my ink's drying. We need to get this thing signed. Like that was one thing where they could have been added that would have been nice.
Yeah. Some of the folks that are commenting this morning are asking a lot of law enforcement related questions. So we'll get back onto that, Taylor. What is the purpose of law enforcement here in America?
To enforce laws.
Wow, pretty simple.
Yes. So, yeah, basically to enforce laws. I could get into it a little bit more, but we talked about this a little yesterday, and this idea of the thin blue line, you see it everywhere. And I think some people have forgotten what it is. I don't even think I was told what it is or what it means, but, and maybe I'm wrong, but I believe it represents the division between order and chaos. And someone standing in the gap between those two things. And that's what law enforcement officers do. And they are there to prevent chaos from encroaching on society. And I think they're also there from preventing too much order to encroach on society. You as a former law enforcement officer understand that like there's so much emphasis placed on not violating someone's Fourth Amendment. And I think for some people that understanding for them is important because they don't want to lose their job. But for me, it's more than that. It's like, I really do not want to violate someone's Fourth Amendment because I really believe it's important. And I've read the Gulag Archipelago, and I don't want to go there. So I think it's important to understand that thin blue line is to protect from there being too much chaos and protect from there being too much order. But ultimately, the job of a cop is to enforce laws. Yeah,
I agree. Totally agree. And I like the simplicity of that because, like you and I talked about yesterday, Taylor, I can, if while enforcing laws, if I can help you and safeguard you, that's a win for me morally. However, it doesn't negate the fact that, when I took the oath to the mayor of the city that I was a police officer in, what the oath was. It was, to enforce the laws without passion or prejudice. Mm-hmm. Tell me, what do you think? One of the things that some of our listeners and viewers always want to know is like, what was your best day and worst day? And if you don't mind sharing that with us.
Well, I don't have as many years as some in law enforcement. But let's see. I'd say my worst day. We'll start with worst. And this isn't like bloody and gory or or whatever, but I'd say one of my worst days was having to do this death notification. I was actually on the program, still on the training program, and I think it was like my fourth week on the training program, and the FTO and I had to go do a death notification of a guy who I think I'm assuming he was like on a business trip in Virginia, and when we got to the house to tell his wife, their like grandchildren were over, and we had to go tell her like in the office, and just watching the look on her face and her entire world collapse. It wasn't one of those death notifications where like someone maybe expected it. I mean, everyone's always sad when it happens, but you can tell when it's like, oh, okay, there's somewhat an expectance there. It was completely out of the blue for this lady, and just watching her whole world collapse. Yeah, I can still see her face, like, and her reaction to that. So that was really rough, especially because I was like kind of new, and even my FTO, like we got back in the car. He was like, man, I know we're not supposed to smoke in the car, but I don't care right now. Like, he put up a cigarette in the car, and he was like, man, he's like, that is the worst death notification I've ever done. And I was like, okay, I just want to make sure I'm not like, I wasn't a little too freaked out, because I said that was terrible. He's like, no, yeah, that was awful. But anyways, I don't know. That's probably kind of a strange worst day situation. But the best day, I would say that's the reason that we maybe sticks out, is because that's something I hadn't really thought about as a cop. I didn't really think about the idea of going to tell someone their loved one had died and watching them react to that. I mean, like when we were leaving, like it wasn't like policy, but I even like was hugged her and like prayed for her real quick, because like just what she was going through. But anyways, the best day, let's see. I can think of a really good day was we went to an unruly juvenile call, and it was in this trailer park, and the kid was he was being unruly. He was an unruly juvenile. We got this all the time. And he was, I think, 10 years old, and he'd been threatened, suicide threats of suicide. And we get in there to the trailer, and there's not a clear countertop in the whole place. I mean, every table's covered. And you've seen the type. Yeah. Go in his room, and I'm walking on like, piles of clothes. There's not a single clean area in the whole house. He's not sleeping in sheets. He's sleeping like, there's like the mattress cover had like a cut in it, and he was sleeping inside the cut of the mattress cover. It was just horrible conditions. Going back to that chaos and order thing, and like he was in chaos, and I'm like, there's no wonder this kid's threatening to kill himself. Like, I would be more surprised if he didn't threaten to kill himself because of what he's living in. The interesting thing that happened was when we stepped into that space, we represented order, and he was, I mean, the kid was acting like an animal. And I'm not saying that offensively. I'm saying literally, he was acting like he was climbing around on stuff. And it was almost as if I was like in a petting zoo or something, because he was just like climbing on shelves and climbing over things. And it was just so weird how the chaos was manifesting itself in his personality and his mannerisms. But when we stepped in there and represented order, and he was like, he had just his underwear on, and we needed to take him down to the hospital to get checked out because obviously he threatened suicide. But I told him, I said, he didn't listen to his mom, he didn't listen to the uncle or stepdad or whatever that was like sleeping on the couch. And I told him to get dressed, and I didn't ask him to get dressed, and I didn't just say like, all right, man, get dressed. I said it in a way that I expected him to do it. Like I said it like when I tell my kids to do something. And when I did it, he did it. And I was shocked, to be honest. Like, but then like as I started to later kind of reflect back on it and realize like I was probably the only order in his life that he had ever seen. And I think he kind of gravitated towards that. And maybe also just the male presence or something as well may have been a factor in that. But taking him out of that house and like to get evaluated, and I don't know what happened afterwards. I mean, He's probably back and maybe a worse situation now. But for that moment, at least, taking him out of that chaos and showing him order and some sense of organization or whatever. It was neat, and it was also neat just to see his reaction to that. And so.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I don't know, they're probably kind of unusual best and worst day stories.
I like it because that's the kind of stuff that law enforcement officers do day in and day out, and normally doesn't get covered. And I've had very similar experiences to both of those. One of which was we had a motorcycle fatality, and we couldn't find the body because he was ejected from the motorcycle, hit the guardrail. One of his legs was cut off by the guardrail, and the body projected into the trees. And it was late at night, and we were looking for the body in the woods, but we found the leg. And I remember me and another officer walked up to it, and I saw that there was still a wallet in the back pocket. I pulled the wallet out and I opened it up, and the officer standing next to me was a good friend of the guy.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, he went weak-kneed, and it was like, oh my God, and he was completely messed up and had to leave. And so, yeah, that kind of stuff happens all the time. And law enforcement officers, we're husbands and fathers and mothers and sisters and people with feelings and compassion. And I'll just echo a comment that Jera just made here in the comments section, Taylor. She says, being an officer has to be so hard. It hurts to see the disrespect they've been getting. Know your job really is appreciated. And I echo her comments. As far as law enforcement, what is the state of law enforcement in America today from where you sit?
So I wrote an article a while back called "Refund the Police," and it goes into some of these details. But I think people have kind of, like we talked about earlier, forgotten what law enforcement is for, and they think that law enforcement, while it is a profession that kind of can be somewhat of a social, not a social worker, but do things that a social worker is expected to do. Like we have, what is it, CIT, critical incident response training, which they're to respond for someone having a mental breakdown or thoughts of suicide. So there is that aspect of it. But I think people forget, what law enforcement is for and what their job is for. And, and this idea that cops are out intentionally hunting certain groups of people because of their skin color, religion, whatever, is just so absolutely absurd. I mean, it's absurd not just because I know a lot of officers and I know that they don't do that, but it's also absurd because even if there was an officer that wanted to do that, that would not be a good career decision to make. Like, you're just not going to be able to get away with that for very long. Maybe you could have back in the 60s or 50s or whatever, but you can't do it nowadays if you even if you wanted to. So yeah, it's a ridiculous idea to suggest that that's what's happening. And also to suggest that people are profiling based purely on the color of someone's skin. I think that our society as a whole, not just in law enforcement, but the idea of, profiling, if you see someone wearing clothing that usually is worn by someone who is a criminal, I mean, there are natural biological things inside of us that tell us, hey, maybe I should stay away from it. And I think that more and more in our culture, we're trying to suppress those instincts. And I don't know, I haven't seen any studies on this, but I'd be interested to know if there are people and victims that would have otherwise made a different decision, but they didn't make the right decision because they didn't want to be accused of profiling someone. A lady's walking down the street and she sees, some white dude walking towards her, black dude, Hispanic, whatever, with, tattoos, teardrop tattoos on his face, and wearing a hoodie and baggy clothes. It's like, maybe I should cross the street and walk on the other side of the street. And it's like, I wonder how many people don't make those decisions. And it's a silly example, or I'm sure it happens as well, but don't make those decisions based on gut instinct, and would have otherwise not been a victim. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but the idea, going back to profiling, you know, it's like cops don't profile someone just on their race. Like there's so many other factors of like body language and everything else that goes into that, primarily body language. But yeah, this popular, or at least mainstream media popular sentiment right now that cops are just profiling people based on their race and hunting people based on their race is absolutely absurd and offensive. And I think it's those groups, as far as the news organizations that are doing that, should be somewhat held responsible for these killings that are happening of officers. I mean, just going back to what you said earlier about the lady that was motivated to go into the Capitol and do that. I think people are being motivated because that's what they're being told. They're being told a narrative. And yeah, if you're being told a narrative that officers are hunting your race or people that match your description, and you absolutely believe that that's the case, then a reasonable response is to go out and fight. And I think that's what we're seeing.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. I think there should be some accountability, you know. And I think a lot of the adults in the room have ceded responsibility to, like, members of the media, you know, elected leaders that have gone out and said things that insinuated that officers were, you know, hunting certain members of the community. And it's absolutely insane to me that we're allowing this to take place. Having seen the events of 2020 and just a preview so far of 2021, man, what are your thoughts? Where is all this going?
I don't know. It actually reminds me, one of the guys that's in the chat, Peter Miller, he sent me a meme the other day, and it was a picture of the new Joker from the new Joker movie, new Joker and the clown from It on like some the caption was 2020 showing 2020 or 2021 around.
I saw that meme, man. That was hilarious.
I was like, oh, I hate to laugh at it just because all the horrible stuff that's happening. But I was like, oh my gosh, it's on the money. I hope it's not the case, but the idea before the new year even happened, people were like, can't wait for 2020 to be over. And I was like, it's not going to stop. Like, it's not just bookended by 2020. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. What was your, like, what's going on right now? I don't know. It's crazy. I mean, I know there have been crazier times in history, definitely. And going back to Thanksgiving, there was some sentiment about like what is there to be thankful for, and I'm thinking like, well, there's a lot to be thankful for. I mean, just think about the first Thanksgiving, like half the people died. So it's, I mean, there's definitely a lot to be thankful for. Now, are there crazy things happening? Yeah, absolutely. But there's a book that said this was all going to happen, turmoil and wars. So
yeah, you're right. You know, people look at, oh my God, the Capitol building, you know, people have been shot and killed inside the Capitol building, and this is awful. Well, you know, again, you got to know your history. I think it was 1954, some Puerto Rican separatists, 2 men and a woman, I believe it was. Back then, there was no, you know, metal detectors. Nobody was searched before they went into the chambers. They make it inside the chambers, and at some point open fire on the lawmakers below, and they're up in the balcony, and they wound 4 or 5 congressmen and women. So yeah, this kind of thing happened. We're going to be okay, folks, but you need to be you need to know your history. Number one, we don't need to start erasing our history. We need to be aware of it, use it contextually to help us navigate the future waters and make sound, mature decisions, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think on top of that, being just general preparedness, little stuff we talked about earlier, when all this COVID stuff kicked off, like really early 2020, I feel like in some regards, I felt better than other people in my circles because I had done a little bit of preparedness and prepared for something like that. Now, I don't think anyone is completely prepared. So there are certain things where I'm like, man, I wish I had done that before this happened, or I wish I had got that. But I think just having that general preparedness and thinking to yourself, like, what if this falls apart? Like, what if either society just collapses or whatnot? Like, what do I have to be self-reliant? Just one example is the Nashville bombing that recently happened and the AT&T outage. After that happened, I have my amateur radio license. I'm a technician amateur radio license from 2014. But seeing that and seeing what the Nashville people went through made me realize even more like, okay, I need to take this more seriously and have some form of like emergency communications prepared in the event my wife is in another city or whatnot, and we have to somehow link up and coordinate. I think we become so reliant on the infrastructure, be it both logistic and telecommunications that we have in this country, that we've forgotten what it would be like if we didn't have those.
Yeah, and of course, before I left the American Red Cross and came to the American Warrior Society, my job was to do disaster preparedness for the entire state of Tennessee, and been to the governor's mansion a few times and sat on the emergency services committee for the state of Tennessee. And yeah, so my preparedness coming into COVID was pretty good. And if you're interested in learning more, check out AmericanWarriorSociety.com. We've got some disaster preparedness checklists in there for you. And it's not just a list of items, it's how to best employ those items as well. And, with saying that, getting the training necessary to utilize those skills, or as we talked about, I don't know if it was me and you, Taylor, yesterday, but, your own personal physical fitness.
Mm-hmm.
You're far more likely to die of a heart attack than you are from a violent assault. So take care of your body. It's what's going to get you through the disaster.
Yep.
Taylor, I've kept you on here for quite a long time, my friend. What are any final thoughts that you have for our audience?
I'd say one is don't look to government to solve your problems. Obviously they can solve some problems, but I think we put way too much emphasis on expecting other humans that are just as flawed as we are, if not more, to solve problems that should be solved on the individual level. Put more faith in God than government, and realize that he's always in control. He's been in control throughout history, even in the 20th century when things were way worse than what we're experiencing were going on. And then, going back to the tactical training aspect of it, get training in firearms, get training in first aid, trauma care, and also like what you just said, get in shape.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of the comments here. Brett Parker says, thank you, Taylor. Bruce says, thank you, gentlemen. Another great show. Jara says, thank you, Taylor. Gerald says, thank you for your time. Know that most of us are not looking to the government. Yeah. Recently, I'm an amateur genealogist too. And I found one of the counties here in East Tennessee had some papers of Americans going through the Civil War. And one of them was a great, great grandfather of mine. And it was some of the papers that he and his wife had written during the Civil War. He was 45 when the Civil War started, and Confederate raiders came into their community and was, trying to get all the men to join up. And so he went to Knoxville to try to join the Union Army at 45. And they're like, look, man, you got rheumatoid arthritis. You're an old dude. We can't take you. So they sent him back home, and the raiders tried to get him. So he spent 4 years hiding in the mountains with his wife, bringing him and some other men food as they moved from cave to cave, because they did not want to be part of the Confederacy. And then, of course, she wrote about the Confederates breaking in, stealing all their food, taking their horses and pigs and stuff like that, and her cursing them and kicking them as they were taking all their stuff. I don't think Americans really I think a lot of people are doing LARPing, live action role play with these things. And in reality, they don't recognize the serious tragedy that any kind of conflict would be here in America.
Yeah.
I think there's an idea that no, America's special and nothing, that kind of thing won't happen here again. It has happened. They don't think that we could have an economic collapse because it just cannot happen here. That happens somewhere else. It can happen here. We can't print money to infinity. So these are just things that, again, think about when you go to the ballot box. Be considerate of the context that we find ourselves in 2021, and like you said, study the word and do the best that you can. Anything else, Taylor?
No, yeah, you. That's absolutely, I absolutely agree. That normalcy bias that, oh, it can never happen, or things will just continue going on the way they have always been. I think that's a lie.
Yeah, that's a dangerous fallacy. Taylor, where can folks find you?
So the website is defendersanddisciples.com, defendersanddisciples.com. And that's where the contact link and all the articles and stuff that they can read if they want to, or reach out to me via email on there.
All right, great. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for what you do for our community. We greatly appreciate you having on the show this morning and taking time with our viewers and listeners on the podcast. Folks, be safe out there, and remember, the fight is coming. Be ready.